Good morning. Just Rob. Uh, I'm aware that it's a breakfast that's with Karen, so I'll try to end up back at that place. We'll talk a little bit of Daralach and try to end up back with at the Karev. Um, His Shlomo Kluger was a prolific Mechiras farm, prolific writer. Hundreds, probably thousands of chuvas. I think when they're done putting out all the volumes of his farm, in the hundreds. He was a prolific Mechiras farm, writer. He in the back of the Sefer, I think it's Arbi Nachal from the Baal Vush Yisrad and Shulchan Aruch. His Einikel put in a few chuvas from Shlomo Kluger. Like it's not in any of Shlomo Kluger's Svarim himself. I'm sorry, it's a Sefer called B'nai Desha. It's a different Sefer from the same Mechaber. And in the back over there, they stashed in a few chuvas from Shlomo Kluger on like 5 or 6 different topics. Now, one of the chuvas in there is a tshuva that Mechiras Chametz, Shiloh that Mechiras Chametz over there that Shlomo Kluger writes on, and in it he is exposing a big maflekes that maybe wasn't so known, that he's exposing Yal's Jew there. So I want to talk about this maflekes that he's talking about. It's maflekes that happen with the town of Yas. Yas is a town called, I think it's Jassy today. If you look it up, it's not a small town. It's a big city in Romania. In the time that the tshuva was written in 1842, it had a population of I think, Barach 300,000 people, of which 40% were Jews. So it's a tremendous Jewish kehillah. Probably that's following only like the real large kehillahs like Varsha, Rod, Lemberg. It's a tremendous large kehillah. Now this kehillah had a rav over there, whose name was I think Rabbi Yosef. I forgot his last name. Rabbi Yosef something. He was a rav. And eventually the job got too hard for him to run the city on his own, and they brought in a second rav, Rabbi Yankel Tal. These were two Chassidish Yidden. The one was a what do you call it, Rishon Chas, and one was a Talmud of Lev Yitzchak of Aditchev. But these were the two Rabbanim of Yas in the 1840s. Now, the original Rav of Yas made a takana in Hilchos Mechiras Chametz that led to a big fight amongst these two Rabbanim. And ultimately, it was a machlekes l'shem shemayim, and they resolved it, and they ended up coming fatanim with each other and dik shidduch with each other. But just to give the background, and then we'll talk about this fight. So, the Mechiras Chametz, as we know it today, is not something that goes back as long as you would think. Meaning, the Gemara in Psachim talks about selling Chametz one time. It talks about selling it to avoid being over by Rabbi Yimah. And it's talking about a Mechira l'chalutin, a regular Mechira. I have a loaf of bread that's extra. I sell it to my Goyish neighbor Erev Pesach, because the Gemara says, you're Mekayim with that by your Rabbi Yimatzah. And you got rid of your Chametz, that's your Mekayim it. It has nothing to do with the Mechiras Chametz that we know of today, of, organizing all your Chametz Atadatzim, selling it with the Rab of the town, of the Shul, of the Kvutza. Has nothing to do with that. So now where does that come from? So there's a Tesepta in Psachim and Perik Beis that says, Yisrael ba'itichadin shabam besina. Yid and Gun were traveling on a boat together, and the Yid realizes that it's coming time of Pesach to get rid of Chametz, and he passes of Chametz. So the Tesefta says, if you give his Chametz, sell his Chametz to the guy who's with him, and after Pesach, he could buy it back. So here's the first time you see the Tesefta talking about a Mechira that's not l'chalutin, a Mechira where you're going to sell it or you're going to get it back at the end of Pesach. Now what's this discussing? Tesefta is discussing a Yid and a Goyish, a merchant, who travel together to buy, stock, and they're on their way home with a boat full of stock. And if you sell all the stuff to the guys, then you lost everything. The whole trip was for nothing. So it says, shas atchak, it's a pitch. We need to come with some sort of eights of you. So the eights is you could sell it to the guy and then get it back after Pesach. The guy will sell it back to you. As I said, the Sefta. Now, there's a machlekes rishonim about the girsa Sefta. The Bahag, when he brings down the Sefta, says a girsa ubulvad shelo ya'arib, as long as you don't do harama, which would imply, and this is what the Bahag runs out from it, but that this doesn't become a yearly thing. This can't be every year on Erev Pesach. You sell your chavetz to guy, and ma'arek, you take it back at the end of Pesach. That's what the Bahag has, this girsa the Sefta v'achli ya'arib. Other rishonim who are chalik, the Meiri, the Ritva, others in various different places throughout Psachim, they say b'vachli ya'arib means don't do it with a mechira that's not a real mechira. Don't do a mechira that's a haram, a fake mechira. You say, yeah, wink, wink. The Vasky will take it. It has to be a structure of a mechira. You have to really do a mechira. V'achli ya'arim in the mechira, but not to lay ya'arim to do it every year. And this is a machlekes rishonim how to learn this after. It's even a machlekes rishonim if this girsa exists in this after or not. But yich this is a machlekes. This is the makar of the mechiras chametz the way we know it. And the Beis Yosef in Simataf Ben Chas, when he brings down the makar of mechiras chametz, brings this Tesefta with the machlekes rishonim on how much you could do it. And because of this, the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch were not so samach to be mekel on Mechiras Chametz, and then by the Svardim, until very recently, they really didn't do Mechiras Chametz to every year. So when did it become mamish like a popular thing that everybody did? Is when we know this, everybody, Jews of Europe, under the empire of the Tsars and etc., went into the business of market. Right, Jews had liquor houses, brew houses, and houses spread throughout different estates, and they would sell liquor. Now, if you're going to be in the liquor business and you're going to own a big stock of liquor, it becomes very, very impractical to have to sell chametz every year. Liquor is all chametz, and you can have, everyone's parnasa is tali, and you connect to it, and what are you supposed to do? So the Bach, who was the Gadol Hadar at the time in Poland, the Bach was makel even further. The Bach said you could keep your chametz in your own house, and you could just sell the makim to the gadi, and with that you'll alleviate this whole issue. And the Bach really institutionalized selling chametz, by and large, in a very institutional way. Now, if you look through the, Hishtalshalos, the Mechiras Chametz, you'll see it's littered with the contributions of Gedolei Hadar throughout the generations. It's not the, backbench. It's literally all the Gedolei Hadar are layering in. The next one after the Bachs, the Yehuda crafts a star. The way we do it, selling Chametz, or just a star on its own without any major kinyanim, just a star harsha, and selling like that. So that Yehuda in Shivas Tzion, in his son's Tshuva and Tshuva Yud, he has a nusach written in German, like the German Yiddish, what the Jews spoke in those days, a star. The Chassam Sofer updates the star, writes his version, and publishes it in Vienna. And every layer that gets added on is by the Gedolei with that generation up to the Chassam Sofer in Tshuva Kofi Gimel and Erchaim. The Sofer writes that anybody who's ma'arer on the Mechiras Chametz, the Klai Sosevachan, is royally l'shaska. You should shut him down. Don't let anybody be ma'arer on it. Hagam Sofer is very well aware of its matter of form and the fact that it's not going on forever. So Lev says this is a kula hafta that Klai Yisrael needs, and it's done with the proper way. It's done properly, and you have to be samech on the Tesefta, the Chuvas Hadeshin, and the Bach, and the Yehuda, and etc. And really, one could be samech on this, and you should not have people doing mahara on this talk. Now, one of the big innovations that became amish commonplace is the innovation of one person executing the mechira on behalf of Evdadadi. Back in the day, even when the Bach was told me that, you would go to the guy that you knew, and you'd sell all your chametz. Maybe it was a cooler to do it every year, some sort of harama, you're being semcha, but you did a mechira by yourself. It was a relationship, a business relationship you had with your fellow. Came along before this, really, but came along the Balatanya and the Tshuva, and the Balatanya in his Shulchan Aruch Rav on Mechiras Chametz mentions this already. That it became a cooler where one person, the way they did it originally, was one yid would buy everybody in the town's chametz, and then that yid would sell the chametz to the guy. Today we do it a little differently. We do it like a harsha. It's not really a mechira. We don't sell it to one yid. We sell it eventually for the guy. But that's the kula that's becoming, more and more commonplace. Now, in the town of Yas, it seems until the 1840s, everybody sold their chametz to the guy that they knew. Came along, Yitzchak, I forgot his last name, still forgot his last name, and he instituted a mechira, tziburit, the mechira that everybody could contribute, sell it all to one yid, and that yid will sell it to a guy. Came along this new Rav, Moshe Tau, and he said, Yaakov Tau, and he said, how you talking to do this? It's such a harama, it's not a good Mechiras Chametz, and he started being marish elamis that this is not a good way to go. Now it seems like this fight went on like in the background for a couple of years, but each one was doing what they were doing, and it wasn't so terrible. In 1843, it seems for some reason this fight exploded, and no less than 7 kontresim/svarim, today none of them are available, we can find them on like Eitzar Chachma or whatever, no less than 7 svarim kontresim were put out on this. He put out first a sefer called Siag LaTorah, the Mekel put out a sefer called Siag LaTorah, the next one came and put out Madaraba, Hasara Sasyag, and then Hachzaka Sasyag, and Bitul Meida, if like one after the other 6 or 7 kontresim back or forth, each defending their position, until finally they decided to reach out to Reb Shlomo Kluger, was the Gadol Hadar, and ask him for his opinion. Reb Shlomo Kluger, most of this story we only know from the Tshuva of Reb Shlomo Kluger. Reb Shlomo Kluger in the Akdamah of the Tshuva, he writes this fight that's taking place in Yas, and he writes Hagam that I know Reb Yosef from a long time ago, and he's a close friend of mine, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, but I'm not going to have him in years. And when his compatriot, who I don't know, Reb Yankel Taub is right, he's right, and I'm going to support him, and he supports the Mechira Tzibur, selling as a Tzibur together. Shlomo Kluger has a whole tshuva where he supports it. Ultimately, what's interesting is at the end of the tshuva, Shlomo Kluger puts a postscript, which seems got added on later on, where he says he's rethought it. There's a lot of coolness involved, but now he's not so happy. So Shlomo Kluger in one tshuva is probably the Mekel and Machmer at the same time, but ultimately he supports the tshuva. Now, without going into the nitty-gritty of the halachic aspects of all the riots he brings, And even the creative Gemara in Pesachim that he finds that seems to indicate that Mechiras Chametz in this manner was going on for a long time earlier. He finds a Gemara in Pesachim Yud Gimel, and he holds you could make it stem like this. But Shalom Kulder writes over there something that was interesting to me that I think is relevant to what we're talking about today. He writes over there, it's a play on words. The Gemara says Chametz Mesur L'Kol, Erev is not Mesur L'Kol. He says Chametz Mesur L'Kol means as follows. The problem that's faced by the fact that Aleidik are Chametz to be Surim, Pesach, dealing with Pesach is Mesur L'Kol. Everybody's facing the same issues. We all have to deal with Pesach. He's handling in a halachic aspect and dealing with Chametz. But Pesach Mesur L'Kol. And therefore he says, what better way to deal with it than to have, one person who's in charge that can do it properly and get everything done. That's the way to get it done properly. And to leave it to each person individually to have to deal with it in his own. You're ultimately going to have tons of mistakes and errors. People are not going to do it properly. So since it's something that is applicable to everybody, the best way to do it is to centralize it and to get it done properly. Now, so I was thinking, l'chayra, this get-together is about the same topic. This get-together is about Chametz Mesur L'Kol. The Pesach that everybody celebrates together is Mesur L'Kol. It's something everybody faces as see where everybody has the same tzrachim needs. This time of year is the same for everybody. And what better way to do it than to get together and centralize that everybody's needs and abilities could be brought together to the same table to Aleidik, to Chametz Mesur L'Kol. Now, just to be moisip a nightbach on this, the Gemara Pesachim, it's the gate to this year in the 6th paragraph Pesachim. The Mishnah brings down the Eilu Dvarim that Adeichel Shabbos for Pesach. We're talking about Erev Pesach Shachal b'Shabbos, like a year like this year. And the Mishnah is talking about all the Kabbalah Pesach and which exactly Surim are not Deicha, Yedeicha. The Gemara says a fascinating story. The Gemara says that the Bnei B'Seira, this is talking about 100 years before the Chorban, the Bnei B'Seira were the Nesiya Sanhedrin, and they came to an Erev Pesach Shachal b'Shabbos and they said, does anybody know what the halach is? What do we do on such a year? You ring, you not bring. Well, what do we do about the Korban Pesach on this year? And it says Hillel, who had just came up from Eretz Yisrael, Hillel Azakin, who had just came up from Bavel, he says, I know from Shvai and Athalia, my Rebbeim, that Pesach is Deicha Shabbos in this regard. We're allowed to do Korban Pesach now on our Pesach Shachal b'Shabbos. And it says, in just a major mark of humility, that the Bnei B'Seira, the children of B'Seira, who were the Nesiim of Sanhedrin, they were Masalik themselves, and they said, that you know this and we don't know this, you become the Nasiim, you take this over. Hillel's Nesias, Hillel's family being the Nesiim, lasted for about 450 years after that. All the way through the Tkufas Amiraim, for a long, long time, Hillel with his Mishpacha became the Nesiim. And all because of this story. So the Gemara continues on, the Gemara discusses what's taka the rationale why it's Deicha Shabbos, and says, Hillel says it's a Sushal from Talmud. We learn it from the Korban Talmud. Hillel says, Haloi, is there only one Pesach that falls out of Erev Shabbos? Haloi, there's close to 200 that fall out on Shabbos, because the Talmud falls out all the time on Shabbos and we do it. So Hillel says, just like Talmud is Deicha Shabbos, and he brings the Gzeir Shava, and he brings the Kal V'Chomer, both, and he supports this din, that Talmud is Deicha Shabbos, so Pesach is also. Now the Maral in V'ur Hashem explains this Gemara in a more achshavidik way. The Maral explains that what Hillel was saying is that Korban Pesach is a Korban Tzibur. It's a davar tziburi. It's something everybody does together. Things that are dvarim shel tzibur are Deicha Shabbos. That's what Hillel was showing from the Korban Talmud. So I say the same. I say we have a Korban Tzibur, which is a Korban Tzibur and a Chametz Mesur L'Kol that we're here today to do, and it should be a schos for all of us. Good to kasher and yamtiv.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.